Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned in to the InfoWars Nightly News. Tonight is Wednesday, February 6, 2013. We are live, and I'm your host, Aaron Dykes. Now, coming up later in the program, we have an interview with Jennifer Stahl, who was arrested over the smart meter matter for trying to refuse the installation. That's coming up on the other side with our reporter, Melissa Melton. But first up in the news, Kurt Nemo's article about cops manning random revenue enhancement checkpoints in Florida. They're no longer just restricting themselves to DIU checkpoints, checking drivers for sobriety, which is already unconstitutional in violation of the Fourth Amendment, presuming someone to be guilty until proven innocent. Now they're going to be pulling over vehicles at unconstitutional checkpoints, and in a very Nazi paper-please manner, they're going to be checking vehicles for worn tires, bad brakes, lighting defects, and other minor regulatory details on cars so they can issue tickets and collect revenue. And Kurt very much takes the tact of how they're bolstering the coffers of the state, adding millions of dollars to pay for expanding programs and all their pensions for their bureaucrats, all retiring en masse. But the point is, they're just moving further and further with the police state. I never liked the DUI checkpoints. They're clearly not okay with the Bill of Rights and Constitution. But there is a problem with drunk drivers, so at least they have the guise of trying to stop the emergency of the tens of thousands of deaths that happen on the highways each year. But with revenue collection checkpoints, minor things wrong on a car, they already have cops patrolling and pulling people over and issuing tickets for that. They don't need to presume everyone guilty and have a Stasi checkpoint like it's a banana republic. Very disgusting, not a good move, not a good sign, especially if other states follow suit. Really out of control. Meanwhile, in furtherance of this entire gun control agenda, the Demand a Plan group, the NBC 30 Rock Center, actors primarily from SNL and other comedy shows who are basically bought and paid for by people like Bill Gates and Rockefeller and Mayor Bloomberg, did a press conference today. Chris Rock spoke there and had some very disturbing things to say, saying that basically Obama is the country's boss and he's the dad of the country. No, the president works to serve the people of the country and is supposed to uphold the Constitution and Bill of Rights, although it's pretty clear the man in office is not even entitled to be in office and has no interest in upholding the Constitution. But just check out what he said in this press conference. Very strange. Of course, the comedian and actor Chris Rock. I'm just here to support the president of the United States, he said. The president is our boss. But he's also, you know, the president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen. And if you don't, it can bite you in the ass later on. So I'm here to support the president. Let's go ahead and roll that clip. It's real strange. Collectivist rhetoric. Do we have that ready to go, guys? Let's go to it right now.
I am just here to support the president of the United States. The president of the United States is, you know, our boss, but he's also, you know, the president and the first lady are kind of like the mom and the dad of the country. And when your dad says something, you listen. And when you don't, it usually bites you in the ass later on.
And that's an excerpt, but very bad idea right there. First of all, they consider all kinds of dictators, classically Joseph Stalin, to be the father of the country, and they all idolized him and painted him as, you know, with children and how he's leading the country single-handedly, taking care of things. We know that leads to a total loss of rights. It leads to democide. It leads to genocide, starvation, centralized control of almost anything. Not a good idea. But furthermore, shall not infringe. Hasn't changed since yesterday or the past several weeks that we've been standing up for the Second Amendment. Of course, standing up for it for a long time. But this whole idea of we've got to turn in the guns, guns are illegal, and the mayors and everybody's got to stand up. Well, the point is it's backfiring. We'll get more into that in a moment. But he also, of course, he's such a comedian. He also said every mass shooting is done by guys who live with their mom, who live in their mother's basement. So I believe you should have to have a mortgage to own a gun. And while that's just a joke, Chris Rock, we know they really are trying to restrict gun access, turn it into a privilege when it's clearly a right. not only for self-defense in the home, but to stave off would-be usurpers, would-be dictators, and tyranny in general. This whole nightmare bad joke thing. Let's go to his actual stand-up comedy on gun rights and what he calls the $5,000 bullet policy from some time ago. Do we have that clip, guys?
About gun control, gotta get rid of the guns. Man, I like guns. You don't need no gun control. You know what you need? We need some bullet control. I think all bullets should cost $5,000. Because if a bullet costs $5,000, there'll be no more innocent bystanders.
Oh, it's another Hollywood hypocrite. He says he likes guns. He appears in dozens of movies firing weapons, playing up the celebrity aspect of just random fire, killing people in hostage situations, portraying heroes as people who go on killing sprees and evade the law. Then he wants to stand up and try to pimp for gun confiscation. Well, it's because he works for a bunch of gangsters in government. Really gross stuff. And even more gangster government than our quickly deteriorating United States of no rights is, of course, China. Now, their one-child policy has, according to their own statistics, prevented the birth of more than 400 million children. It's created a genocide, particularly of young girls, because of the preference for male children and the one-child policy. Millions upon millions upon millions of girls are aborted. They suffer infanticide, or they're lost into a system of sex trafficking and child slavery, all very wicked stuff. But now the actual one-child policy enforcers, which come from the National Family Planning Office, actually crushed a 13-month-old boy to death after the parents refused to pay the fine for having more than one child. So disgusting, should really upset us all. And again, hundreds of millions of children have been the victims of this awful policy under worldwide global eugenics enforced by the United Nations and at the state and national levels. But here is just that one case. You know, Joseph Stalin said one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is just a statistic. Well, here's the case of just one child, a boy physically crushed by a car. They said the parents got upset that they had to pay the fine, that they were found out, that they were being hassled, again, by these family planning enforcement police. And so, well, the police guy just decided he was going to crush the child because he's dehumanized, sees no value in human life, and actually gets paid bonuses for each child he prevents from being born or seizes from parents or gets fine money for or, you know, induces into infanticide. Yes, the family planning officials actually get bonuses for each kill count they have. I am opinionatedly calling it a kill count, but let's be honest, that's what it is. And already abortion is murder. This national policy is suicide, genocide, and murder. But particularly this crushing of the one 13-month-old boy is hardcore murder. And if this doesn't wake us up to the evils of the one-child policy, let's look at all the statements from the eugenicists who think it's so great that they are going to be in control of the earth and everyone else is scum and needs to die and stop reproducing until there's just 1 billion or 2 billion, depending on who you ask. But Jurian Mason, who wrote this article, cites, of course, John P. Holdren and Paul Ehrlich's eco-science plan for the planetary regime that would use food as a weapon to enforce national population limits and enforce them thusly. But he also talks about the United Nations enforcing it. Well, again, as I mentioned, the United Nations are the private foundations, the Rockefeller-controlled Population Center, the Bill Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and so many others go to the individual countries, induce the countries to set up a national family planning office. And as I mentioned, then those workers get bonuses to go house to house to collect data and statistics and target families that have too many children, get them to get on birth control, get them to agree to abortions, or they'll just secretly sterilize you in camps if it's India, or they'll create this massive genocide as in China, as of course we've already talked about. Just discussing, they literally call the people they're seeking after targets. They literally call them targets. And it just goes on. But they want to extend the one-child policy because, of course, we know China is just the model. They want to take it to Africa, in particular Nigeria, because they have such a high birth rate. And they're really just promoting the idea that you should have to have a license to have a child, and that it's okay for a government entity to tell you who's going to be born. Well, we know it's probably going to destroy China. But look at the case from last year. If you guys could pull up the other tab next to that. They also steamrolled a man because he refused to give up his land that the Chinese government wanted to seize and give to a corporation. That's the kind of thing that goes on in China as well. So just so much draconian tyranny. We really have to pray that our country doesn't slip that far. We need to say no against this, expose what the United Nations and these private donor groups that are tax-free here in America are doing, so we can rein this in so it doesn't reach our shores and so we can stop killing people in other countries. Meanwhile, Luke Radowski at wearechange.org has done so much great work over the year. He's just thanklessly and tirelessly confronted people over and over again, and of course sought out stories there in New York, the great metropolis where so many things happen. He got an exclusive interview, really a touching piece, with Joe Lozito. This is a man who was taking the subway. He took it daily, like many New Yorkers, to his job or whatever it was he was doing on a day-to-day basis, and he was attacked by what turned out to be a serial killer. He was completely unarmed and stopped this man who was trying to stab and slice him to death. He had some nearly fatal wounds, and it was just shocking already just to be in that incident, of course, but all the more shocking when he found out later in court testimony and everything that the NYPD had witnessed the entire thing and were approximately 2 to 3 feet away from him behind a closed door, but refused to respond, refused to stop this killer as he attacked this subway passenger. I've excerpted just about a 4.5-minute clip of Luke's larger 13-minute piece, so please go to wearechange.org and watch that entire piece. But let's go now to this incredible encounter that just shows how far things have deteriorated and why the NYPD claims they don't have a duty to protect and serve you.
In New York City, where virtually any form of self-defense is illegal, we're told that the NYPD is here to protect us. Is that really the truth? Is the NYPD required by law to protect the citizens of New York?
Yes. That's what they're there for. Yes.
Yes, they do. They have to serve and protect.
My name is Joseph Lozito. On February 12, 2011, my life was changed forever. It happened on the subway.
And I come right to this seat where I'm sitting right now. I sit down. It's a first seat in the first car. On the other side of this wall is the engineer of the train. After I sit down, 2 uniformed police officers enter the train the same door I did. They proceed to go right into the motorman's compartment through a door just like this. The next thing I know, a man comes up from the middle of the car. He comes to a door, starts banging on the door, bang, 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 looking through the window. And he says, "Let me in, I'm the police." And the police officer behind the door, looking through that window, looks at him and says, "You're not the police." With that, the gentleman turns around and walks back to the middle of the car. As soon as that gentleman left this area, another person that was standing right here next to me comes up here, frantically starts tapping on the window, alternately tapping and looking over his shoulder at the first man, trying to get the police attention, trying to get them to come out. And he's tapping on the window and he's waving, and he's tapping on the window and he's waving. Still no action. They don't come out. The first gentleman that tried to get in, the one who impersonated a police officer, stops 2 feet from me, maybe 3 feet from the store, looks at me, looks down at me, I look up at him. He takes out an 8-inch cooking knife, looks me dead in the eye and says, "You're gonna die, you're gonna die." And with that, he takes the knife and plunges it into my face. So he recoils his arm back for another plunge, and when he brings it back, I shot for his legs. And while I took him down, I was able to take him down. It gave him free rein for the back of my head. And while I was taking him down, he proceeded to stab me and slice me in the back of the head 3 separate times. Finally, the 3rd time he slices up, I'm able to catch his hand, I slam it down, he drops the knife. Right then and there is when I felt a tap on my shoulder, and it was the male cop that was in here, and he taps me on the shoulder and he says, okay, you can get up now, we got him. All the medical personnel is surrounding me. The police officer comes to the head of the bed that I'm on, and he shows me a mugshot, and he says, is this the guy that did this to you? And I said, yes. And he said, well, you're a hero. And I said, well, I'm not a hero, why am I a hero? He goes, well, he killed 4 people last night. They told me later that week I'm gonna have to testify before a grand jury. After you testified, Terrence Howell testified. And long story short, Terrence Howell basically said he was watching from the door through the window, and he was about to come out to stop Maxim Gelman, but when Gelman reached into his jacket, he thought he had a gun, so instead of coming out, he closed the door and stayed inside. And when he told me that, it was like being attacked all over again. You know, I was raised to respect the police, and when I found out that this whole thing could have been prevented, we were furious. I mean, what do you say to that? What do you say when there's 2 police officers less than 2 feet away from you, behind a door? They have guns, I have nothing. They have nightsticks, I have nothing. To me, the NYPD is a symbol of safety and security, and they're there to protect you. That's what I always thought it was. I always thought that's what the police were there for. And now I know, because of my case, the police don't have to do anything. So what they did that day, by staying in there and not coming out until I had control of Maxim Gelman, until I had disarmed him, in the eyes of the city of New York, in the eyes of the state of New York, is perfectly okay. And there's something wrong with that.
And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is a powerful piece up at wearechange.org, but it's a case example not only of a profile in courage and one man's incredible encounters, but also a profile in how everyone expects the police are going to protect them. But when it comes down to the incident, the police have been told that in a legal capacity, they have no duty to protect you. And so if you can't protect yourself, who will? Now, I don't know all the circumstances, so I'm not going to brand this cop a coward, but it certainly looks strange to me that he would completely stand down as a man is being potentially murdered with a knife when he's carrying a gun. And again, you hear the guy in the video talking about how he had nothing, yet because his life was on the line, wrestled this man until he had him overcome. The police had a gun, had a baton, but did nothing, just stood down. But why? Why can't New Yorkers defend themselves, carry weapons when they know there's criminals running rampant in a major city? It's a target-rich environment, so the criminals are only encouraged. But here's Bloomberg, here's the mayors of Chicago and all the major cities saying guns are illegal. We've got to ban them all. We've got to put all power in the hands of government, even though they're sworn not to protect you. Well, those officers and the military are also sworn to uphold the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and we're seeing a movement back towards that, thankfully. But we've got to turn the culture around, remind police that they are here to protect and serve the people of this country. Otherwise, why are we paying your salary, and why are you out there with the attitude like you're above the people? We need to have a general atmosphere of safety, and that comes through armed Americans, not through police-state measures and more government power. Now, Mike Adams has written an op-ed at hisnaturalnews.com. It's up on Infowars.com, detailing how the post-Sandy Hook gun control push spectacularly backfired in America. Mike Adams writes in part that in the aftermath of the tragic Sandy Hook shooting, the push for gun control, however, spectacularly backfired. In reality, it has hardened the positions of gun rights advocates while massively increasing the number of AR-15s and other firearms sold across the country. The backfire is far worse than gun grabbers could have possibly imagined when they launched their efforts on the graves of the dead Sandy Hook children. Yeah, shame on you for exploiting the deaths of children and trying to psyop this entire country. But the lesson we've learned here is what Bill Clinton himself admitted, that there's a deep-set gun culture in this country. Yeah, because it's why this country was founded, and that it's very difficult to overcome them. But here's just a rundown of some of the effects of their over-the-top push for gun control in the wake of Sandy Hook, put together by Mike Adams. Number one, sales of guns reached record levels, almost completely sold out in many parts of the countries. You've seen the stories where lines outside of gun shows were around the block, 500 people just here in Austin, Texas. In Seattle, a gun buyback program turned into an impromptu private sale as people on the streets offered more cash than the cops were to buy guns from citizens. Of course, those were almost certainly law-abiding citizens. Criminals are are always going to get guns. Why shouldn't law-abiding, responsible people have guns to keep a balance of power? That's what the founders always talked about. Furthermore, in the wake of Sandy Hook, the NRA membership spawned 300,000 new members just in the last couple months. Gun Owners of America saw a great surge in their membership. We've heard from the Hollywood hypocrites. It blew up in their face when that one listener from the Alex Jones show put together that powerful clip matching their phony demand a plan where they all act sympathetic against all the different movies they've been in where they spray bullets in every scene and mow down people with wanton glee. And then we've seen this great propaganda pushback where first Obama faked tears and stood on the backs of the children. Well, now he's having his White House propaganda arm put out photos of him with guns and basically agreeing to be in a Photoshop picture to look like he's sympathetic to guns so they can wait until they think the time is right to push for gun control again. And, of course, we saw the same thing with CNN's Piers Morgan. He came down to Katy, Texas, as we already told you earlier in this week, to fire automatic weapons and other AR-15s and guns and stuff at the gun range here in Katy. And so, really, they're just lining up wanting to be pictured with guns. And so Mike Adams writes, how big a deal is all this? It's huge. Just imagine Piers Morgan picking up an AR-15 the day after the Sandy Hook shooting. Never would have happened. So why is he doing it now? It's because he's had himself chewed out. He's had himself beat up through words and through arguments from defenders of the Second Amendment, of course, including Alex Jones and so many others. Now, furthermore, this has caused Americans in general to break their silence and speak up and defend the Second Amendment and say, no, we don't want to go along with this. Secondarily, it's caused a reawakening, a rediscovering of what the Second Amendment is and why it was put in place, why it was in the Bill of Rights. If you've never looked into American history, first of all, it's incredible and full of detail. It's a lot more than you heard in your high school and middle school classrooms. But furthermore, the entire Bill of Rights was its own struggle after the Revolutionary War, after the Constitution was agreed upon, but before it was ratified, because many founders said there weren't enough protections against government, to restrain government, so they wanted to outline and guarantee the right of free press, of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms, and of due process, and of the right to privacy, and to not be searched without warrant and without witnesses. That's all in there for a reason, and it's a don't do list for government. It's a fairly short list of things they're specifically not to do, and government, of course, wants to violate every single one of them. But that's not it for Sandy Hook. This has reawakened the police, the law enforcement, and the sheriffs. You've seen this new movement where at least 230 sheriffs, probably more by this week because they're coming in by the hour, by the day, have not only said they're not going to go along with gun confiscation and new laws against the Second Amendment, they're saying they're going to kick the feds out, kick anyone from the state out if they're there to try to violate the Second Amendment. They're encouraging their citizens to buy guns, arm themselves, because the police and sheriffs can't and won't protect you. As we just saw in that clip, don't consider themselves to have a duty to protect you, so you better protect yourself. And furthermore, states themselves are rediscovering states' rights, many states introducing firearms protection acts or similar legislation, again, putting the feds on notice they're not going to be part of violating the Second Amendment. We have to keep standing up for this because they're going to keep pushing. They'll seize upon the next tragedy if and when it happens, probably only a matter of time. Let's just remember the Second Amendment is timeless, not to be infringed, shall not infringe. That's an order. And speaking of order, the soldiers, the military, of course, part of this component, and they also have spoken out in large numbers, active duty, retired, you name it, saying they will never be part of confiscating guns from Americans. They won't fire on Americans who aren't going to register or turn in guns, and basically just stop it. And that's the message we need to hear. Of course, we've seen pushback against New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and everyone else in between. And, you know, so let's stay vigilant for what they're going to do after the next tragedy. But let's also celebrate the fact that their brazen push to violate our basic rights has has reawoken a large portion of the country, and we can use that, we can mobilize that to continue to inform people and try to restore our republic, our Bill of Rights, and reinstore the great country we once had, which of course was never perfect. Now, we're going to go to what I consider to be one of my favorite reports. It was the first public meeting of the Oath Keepers on April 19th, 2009. We all traveled to just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, to Lexington, to Concord, where the first battle of the American Revolution began. And it's an excellent piece just reminding us about what the Second Amendment is about what this country is about, and about what it means when people say no, they're not going to be pushed any further. And of course, Lexington was started specifically over disarmament of weapons. They went to seize the gunpowder stash and many of the weapons held by the militia there. This, of course, followed the debasing of the currency, outlawing the colonial script. It followed the British imposing a standing army on colonial Americans in the wake of the French and Indian War, supposedly to repel Indian attacks, but increasingly to patrol and keep in line the American colonists as they became more and more angry about the taxation, the lack of representation, and all the other factors going on. But again, it was disarmament that actually sparked the beginning of the revolution, and the feds better back off. We don't want a violent revolution, but people aren't going to put up with being disarmed. And with that, I take you to this powerful special report. We'll be back in just a few minutes here. Please share this with everyone you know. Let's get this broadcast out, and let's reawaken, let's revitalize the Constitution and Bill of Rights.
When you entrust a man with a public trust, and you know that he's human, and you don't want him to run amok, you bind him down with an oath. I know we heard talk today about someday you may see those in the uniform, in violation of their oaths, pointing the gun at you, their masters, in an unlawful way. I pray that never happens. It has happened. I want to assure you, the man in the uniform will not be I.
Today, really, in many respects, our government is the one that is stepping aside the rule of law.
Gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans.
The social controllers are very scared of police and military rediscovering their oath of office.
We will not obey orders to impose martial law.
I will not obey.
They understand that throughout history, tyranny comes to your door in a uniform.
We will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people.
I will not obey.
Think of every instance you can think in history where republics have fallen through usurpation of power. Particularly think of the times when it has happened through the military force run amok.
You can't really tell from my name, but my father lived under Stalin, and his whole family was killed by Stalin. And my mother's family escaped from North Korea, and they lost all their property, and were supposed to be killed at least 3 or 4 times. So I was fortunate to be born in this great nation, and but yet I see the same signs or our country going in the direction in which my parents escaped from.
U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil.
We will not obey any orders to force American citizens into any form of detention camps under any pretext.
I will not obey.
To what degree are we any more mindful of oaths?
If we had law enforcement in America keeping their oath to do just that, we would have our constitutional republic back tomorrow. That's how powerful this movement is.
I'm Garrett Lear, the Patriot Pastor.
This is where the battle was fought, right here in the Lexington Battle Green. This is sacred ground. This is one of the most important pieces of real estate in the history of America. This is where it happened, and this was the shot basically heard around the world, and still being heard around the world, I think.
I grew up in the town of Lexington, standing on the green, playing on the green. When I was a boy growing up, my mother told me about our ancestry, and so I started to go on the village green in Lexington, but didn't pay a whole lot of attention except to the statue of John Parker. Everyone could look up to him because he wasn't white, he wasn't brown, he wasn't red, he wasn't yellow, he wasn't black, he's green, actually. So anyone could identify with him, and I said, one day when I grow up, I want to be like him.
Welcome to Lexington, the cradle of American liberty.
Most people don't know really what happened at the Battle of Lexington, but basically what happened was the night before the battle, that would have been April 18th, riders came in, that's the midnight ride of Paul Revere. It was actually John Dawes that did it, and a man named Prescott, because Paul Revere was interdicted by the British troops. But they were bringing a message from Dr. Warren and the committees of correspondence and the committees of safety in Boston to tell them, looks like the British are mounted troops here, and we're not exactly sure what they're trying to do. They're probably going to go after the munitions that are in Concord, but they're probably going to try to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock and either send them back to England in chains or shoot them right there or something. And basically, when the British came, it was obvious that they had some bad plan. The Minutemen, the militia, the regulated militia, did not want to engage the British troops in a fight.
And so these men stood their ground when they were told, you are to drop your weapons and disband.
Lay down your arms, you damn rebels! Disperse, I say!
Well, they started to disband, but they would not drop their weapons because they were militia. And what happened when they started to disband, they got fired on. The first shot that was fired by the British regulars. It was not fired by the Minutemen. It was not fired by the colonists. It was not fired by the people of Lexington. And we can find that in the narrative of Jonas Clark, the pastor. 8 of them got shot and killed. Many were bayoneted. Some died later of wounds. Many were wounded. But 8 died on this green. But they stopped the British as they were on their march to Concord. And they did what was right. This was a principled stand for freedom, and we're doing the same thing today.
We will not obey orders to disarm the American people.
I will not obey.
Well, today we're here on the green at Lexington, April 19th, which is the anniversary of April 19, 1775, which was the first shot and fire of the American Revolution. I'm Stuart Rhodes, the founder of Oath Keepers, which is a nonpartisan association of current serving military, police, and veterans, all of us who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. And our mission is to make sure that all of the other oath takers are oath keepers.
Gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil.
We've had critics that say, well, what are you guys talking about? Of course I'm going to keep my oath. I find it offensive that you'd even suggest that a military officer or a police officer would not keep the oath. And we say, hey, we got one word for you, Katrina, okay? Look at what happened there. And so we want to make sure there are no more Katrinas. We don't want any more of that. What we're hearing is that a lot of those guys just weren't prepared for those orders and hadn't thought about it ahead of time. Then we have Lieutenant Commander Cunningham, Guy Cunningham, who was the author of the 29 Palms survey that was done back in 1995. Well, he surveyed the Marine Corps, some Marines at 29 Palms, and asked them whether or not they would fire on Americans who resisted in an attempt to disarm them. If orders came down to disarm the American people and they resisted, would they fire on them?
The 29 Palms survey, ending with question 46, with the scenario that the government has banned all non-sporting firearms and that the American citizens in possession of these firearms have 30 days to turn them over to the local authorities. At the end of this period of time, several citizen groups form that refuse or resist the confiscation of these firearms banned by the U.S. government. Marines were asked whether or not they would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse or resist the confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. And I found this very difficult to swallow. 11% opted with the no opinion response. Had no opinion? Firing on their own fellow Americans? Of the remaining 26.34% answered that they would fire on their fellow Americans, U.S. citizens, who refused or resisted the confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. who had no authority constitutionally to enact such a ban. Because of the quotation March 11th, 1993 by President Clinton, because of the Clinton assault weapons ban that was being enacted, I formed a scenario that I knew would be explosive, shouldn't have been, but because of the times and the machinations of certain forces to disarm the American people.
I don't care whether it's your governor or your senator or your representative or your president. I'm sure you can look at instances, days within having sworn his oath, the person violates it blatantly. That's a dangerous thing.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
None of this stuff would be happening if it had stuck with the Constitution and stuck within its parameters.
And we learned the American dream, and we were out there doing that American dream and working, and we were electing representatives that we felt were going to represent us while we were doing other things and maintaining our families and raising our families and doing the right thing as we thought. And I think we were duped in some cases where they've actually let us down.
I saw a tremendous pattern of the growth of the infrastructure of a totalitarian state in the last 8 years post 9/11. I mean, it's been going on for decades. We've seen for decades encroachments on our liberties, and then a crisis would come along, and then all of a sudden they had a chance to get their policies passed they've been wanting to pass for a long time. That's what I saw as just incredibly alarming. And it's just the concept of enemy combatant status itself is an extension of that. And when I was writing at Yale, I wrote a paper on enemy combatant status. It won their award for best paper on the Bill of Rights. And unfortunately, when Obama was elected, he didn't repeal any of those things. And he's left that in place, which is the pattern of all presidents. Whether it's a left boot or a right boot on the back of your neck, we just don't want the boot on the back of our neck.
He stands on that office on the condition of that oath, and the safety valve that he takes is refusing to violate it.
When you swore an oath to defend the Constitution, you took upon yourself an individual obligation to make your own decision on the spot of where that line is and whether an order is lawful or unlawful. You have an obligation to do so, and as the Nazis found out at Nuremberg, just following orders is no excuse.
Are not guilty.
95% of the church, Christian church, supported Hitler, which is terrifying to me. And so I think we need to really wake up and not assume that our fellow citizens won't hurt us.
I would say to any pastor or anyone in the military, should we have a breakdown in things in this country, stay by your Bible and stay by the Constitution. Do those things. And remember that in the history of this world, the terrible debacle, from my perspective anyway, of what happened in Nazi Germany, when the church did not stand by those innocent people, the Jewish people who were exterminated for no other reason than being Jewish.
My God, how did we ever allow our government to reach such a point?
What's happening to the United States is very, very sad. It's sad because we've seen it done to third world nations over and over and over again.
I would like to ask that all of you just take a moment, take a deep breath, and realize the solemn nature of this occasion, because those of you who so choose will be swearing an oath. Pretty serious proposition.
You'll never have anything in your life that's as valuable as your word. So just remember that. If we all do nothing more than fulfill our oath, then we can turn things around just on that alone.
Because it only takes a few relatively faithful servants to diffuse a lot of mischief in times of crisis, if they merely hold to their oath.
If you can't swear that oath, please mentally excuse yourself and don't participate, because I, for one, intend to honor this oath, because we're in perilous times. Not quite so perilous, but perhaps far more perilous than in 1775. Please raise your hand thusly, and when you hear me say "I," pronounce your own name. I, Larry Bailey, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend
I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation.
Without any mental reservation.
Or purpose of evasion.
Or purpose of evasion.
Pledging my life.
Pledging my life.
My fortune.
My fortune.
And my sacred honor.
And my sacred honor.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to our great fraternity. Oath Keepers, an association of active duty military, police officers, and veterans, all of us who swore the oath and will keep our oath, and will honor our oath. If you swore an oath to defend the Constitution, honor your oath by joining us, the Oath Keepers, and become an Oath Keeper.
We're ready for the oath, sir.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me the oath of enlistment. I do solemnly swear or affirm.
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
And again, ladies and gentlemen, all governments become out of control, evil in that respect. All men are flawed and wicked in their own ways. The founders were very excellent men, but the triumph of the revolution was the extent to which they did not usurp powers. George Washington could have been king and was invited to, at least by some, but refused to. They used the Bill of Rights to restrain government. That's the importance of the oath, to keep balanced powers, to keep any one man from having too much power, because we know that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. As Lord Acton said, that may as well be our quote for the day. We're going to be back after this with Jennifer Stahl on the smart meters issue. She'll be interviewed by Melissa Melton about how it's a spy technology in the house. That's coming up on the other side. Thanks for watching the InfoWars Nightly News. Subscribe and share this powerful broadcast at prisonplanet.tv. Go to planetinfowars.com and start your own InfoWar, and let's win back the hearts and minds of this country. It's going to be a culture war and info war. That's the way we're going to win things. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back again tomorrow.